This is another episode of Sorry for Rambling. I'm Alex Kack, and I am joined today by Joseph Kishore, candidate and nominee for President of the United States from the Socialist Equality Party. Joseph, how are you doing today?
Good. Nice to be here, Alex. Thanks.
So, Joseph, let's talk a little bit. Some people may not be familiar with the Socialist Equality Party. What can you tell us about the party itself?
The Socialist Equality Party is the U.S. affiliate of the International Committee of the Fourth International. We're an international movement, the Trotskyist movement. We publish the World Socialist website, wsos.org. And we are fighting here and throughout the world to build an independent movement of the working class on the basis of a socialist program against capitalism, against the two big business parties here in the U.S. and their counterparts internationally. To build a socialist movement in the working class.
Now, for listeners or viewers who may not know all the nuance of in kind of leftist circles, explain the difference between being a Trotskyist and other kind of socialist or communist movements in the U.S.
Sure. Trotsky was a co-leader with Lenin of the Russian Revolution of 1917. And he became the foremost opponent of the Stalinist degeneration of the Soviet Union, forming the left opposition first in 1923. And then going on, he was exiled, or he was expelled from the Communist Party, ultimately exiled from the Soviet Union. He was assassinated by a Stalinist agent in 1940, but 2 years earlier, he led the formation of the Fourth International in 1938. To uphold and defend the traditions of revolutionary socialist internationalism. The question of the perspective of internationalism has always been very much at the core and center of the Trotskyist movement. And it's in opposition to all forms of nationalism, of reformism, of course, of Stalinism. But our perspective is one of uniting the working class. Marx's phrase, Marx and Engels, workers of the world unite. That's the perspective of the Trotskyist movement, that we are building an international movement of the working class to overturn world capitalism. So the Trotskyist movement has existed throughout that period since, the Fourth International has existed since its founding in 1938, and we're the continuity of that perspective. I guess that's the short of it. I could speak at great length about the history of our movement, which is very present in our current politics. I think the perspective of Trotskyism has very much been confirmed in political developments. Of course, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the bankruptcy of Stalinism, the transformation of China, the reintroduction of capitalism in China, the outcome of the perspective of Maoism. And the failure of all national-based projects of national reform or national socialism.
Now, I'm curious because, what it sounds like you guys would ascribe to from a purely ideological sense. It sounds like a more revolutionary movement, and yet here you are running as a political candidate, which seems very much more like maybe ballot socialism at best. How do you justify those purposes, and what do you see as the real purpose of you running?
Well, the Marxist movement has a long tradition of running in elections. We don't look to the state, or in a sense the political process, as the source of social transformation. We're building a movement in the working class, a mass social movement. But Marxists have always run in elections. The purpose is the elections are a forum for which we can fight for a political program and oppose the politics of the ruling class, the Democrats and Republicans, and fight for an independent program and perspective for the working class. So we don't see the electoral process as the fundamental mechanism for social transformation, but the elections are a critical means through which we advance an alternative program and oppose the politics of the ruling class. obviously a lot of people are focused on the elections, or they are politicized, and I think it's really necessary in this context to advance a real program for the working class. Yeah.
Now, so in that framework, do you have any interest in holding elected office ever, or of winning any election?
Yeah, sure. And there's also a tradition of that within the Marxist movement, but we would carry on in the same way in office as we would, in running elections. That is, it becomes a platform for fighting for a program, not adapting to capitalism, but for advancing and speaking to the working class, and encouraging the development of independent organizations, the development of a social movement. But we would operate in an office the same way we would in running an election.
Now, the Socialist Equality Party has ran several candidates before, but it has, from looking at it, it kind of looks like it's been diminishing returns in presidential elections. I think the last time you guys got over 10,000 votes was back in '88 with was that Edward Wynne? And it was the Workers' Party, I believe, back then, correct?
The Workers' League, yeah.
Workers' League, that was it. So, I mean, are you hoping to kind of turn that around? Do you want to push to show that these ideas have broader appeal, or are you really just there to try to communicate this message to as many people as possible?
Well, we would like to fight to get as large a vote as possible, and I think objectively under the present conditions, under conditions of widespread interest in socialism, the population is moving to the left, hostility to capitalism. What we are advancing resonates with a broad movement among workers and young people. I think, though, it's people are perhaps not directly involved in the process of election organization, certainly internationally, but even in the United States, I think are perhaps unaware of how undemocratic the elections are, and they become more undemocratic every year, even just to get on the ballot. Gathering tens of thousands of signatures, and that doesn't even take into account the domination of money, the corporate media, finding ways of actually even being able to present what one's fighting for to a broad audience. Of course, that's changing with the internet and social media. But the electoral process is incredibly undemocratic. It's designed to exclude third parties from really even appearing on the ballot. Now, of course, under the conditions of the pandemic, it becomes even more onerous. We've actually launched a lawsuit here in Michigan challenging the requirement of the state to gather 12,000 signatures to get on the ballot under conditions of a pandemic. We would really have to actually endanger not only our lives, but the lives of countless people, the public at large, to go out and try to gather the signatures required to get on the ballot. It's incredibly undemocratic. So we've launched a lawsuit in Michigan to force the state to put our names on the ballot. We're taking similar initiatives in other states. So we will work to get on the ballot, and we want to get as large a vote as possible. I think it's very important that workers and young people register their opposition to this whole. I mean, what is the ruling class presenting? Trump and Biden, two reactionary representatives of the financial oligarchy and the military. And, I think it's very important that workers express their opposition to this whole framework. So we are certainly going to campaign as aggressively as possible, despite the, severe restrictions that exist, to get as large a vote as possible. But that is, that's I think very, very important. But it's not the fundamental aim of what we're doing. We're fighting to popularize this program, and we'll do that regardless of the outcome of the ballot initiatives that we're taking.
How many ballots do you think that you'll actually wind up appearing on?
It's actually really hard to say at this point. You will be able to vote for us, and workers will be able to vote for us in every state. We'll have write-in status at the very least. In terms of ballot, the actual states that we will be on the ballot, it's at this point difficult to say because we're still in the process of actually lawsuits to challenge it. There are other lawsuits filed by other independent candidates. We're fighting to get on the ballot currently in the state of Illinois, where they actually changed the rules so you can gather signatures electronically. It's still very, very difficult for independent candidates to do that. If you don't have huge financial resources, I mean, that's the main necessity for getting on the ballot. So it's actually somewhat difficult to answer that question now. We're in the process of doing it. Those states that were not able to get on the ballot, there are some states where it's fairly straightforward. You just have but it's relatively few. But in those states where we are not on the ballot, we will have write-in status.
Now, I think the one question that tends to come up in regards to left-wing politics and the electoral sphere on a pretty consistent basis is the fractionalization of it. There are so many different kind of socialist and left-wing parties that tend to put candidates forward. Why not consolidate, I think, is the question that a lot of people have. You know, there seems like there's a greater vote tally there, or a greater kind of amplification of a message if there could be some compromise or some bringing together. Do you see that as something that should be a goal, or do you see that there's just too many nuanced differences between these groups?
Well, no, there are political differences and very significant ones. And one has to examine the program and history of different political tendencies. It's hard to answer the question in the abstract, but if you take something like the Green Party, Howie Hawkins, who is now the presumptive nominee for the Green Party, is actually a member of Socialist Party USA, I believe, as well as his running mate claims to be a socialist. The Green Party and the Hawkins campaign are very much oriented towards the Democratic Party. They have really no independence from bourgeois politics. Actually, if you listen to what Hawkins says, he always declares that, when he's on the ballot, the Democrats win. I mean, that's sort of his selling line now. We can talk in greater detail about that if you wanted. But there are significant political differences between different political tendencies. And one has to examine those differences and base support for a tendency on the basis of the politics that they're advancing. Our orientation is to the working class. And I think one thing that's really important to understand, I mean, the situation we're in is incredibly explosive. And I think one can get a sort of false sense of the possibility of socialism if one sort of looks at it from the standpoint of the electoral system and this or that party. We're living during a period of revolutionary convulsions. The ruling class is implementing an absolutely homicidal policy. The pandemic is spreading throughout the country. As a result of what they've done, their policies have produced this catastrophe that is unfolding in the United States. There's growing anger in the working class. Just over the past several days, there have been work stoppages at critical auto plants in the United States. There's anger among Amazon workers and among meat packers, other sections of the working class, all workers really. They've handed out trillions of dollars to Wall Street with the support of both the Democrats and the Republicans, and including Senator Bernie Sanders, the CARES Act, which endorsed the bailout of Wall Street. Now they're driving this back to work campaign. There's immense social anger, which found initial expression in the eruption of protests over police violence, but I think there's much deeper anger, which is sort of motivating that. That sentiment finds no political expression within the whole framework of official bourgeois politics. And so you can have a situation, I think, where the situation develops very, very rapidly. And you start to have a real class movement, something we haven't seen in this country for many, many years, a mass movement of the working class. But that's, I think, is sort of present in the objective situation. So I think the whole political situation can turn very rapidly. And what appears to, the domination of the Democrats and the Republicans, all of a sudden it becomes clear that these organizations have no genuine mass support. And then workers begin looking for a political tendency that actually represents their interests, that speaks to what they are experiencing. And so you can have a very rapid political shift with the development of a social struggle. And that, I think that's the character of the period we're in, not only in the United States, but all over the world. So it's not so, whether we get on the ballot and how many votes. I mean, yes, that's very important, and we will fight to get votes. But I think that the real sort of political dynamic is it's taking place outside of this whole framework. It's taking place in the developing movement of masses of people. The development, I think, of a situation where you start having the question of a general strike come up, where you start having mass walkouts, where the social anger finds actual expression in the movement of masses of people. And there, then, the question, though, of political leadership is critical. Our party publishes the World Socialist website, the most widely read socialist publication in the world. We have a growing readership among workers throughout the United States, internationally. Our articles are read by many, many thousands of workers. And I think that, as the class struggle develops, the readership of the World Socialist website grows, the political authority then of the Socialist Equality Party will grow, and out of that there will emerge a mass socialist movement. That is our strategic conception and orientation.
Well, I mean, that's kind of been the end goal of like Marxist movements, obviously, time and material. What do you say when people kind of criticize that and say, well, it hasn't happened yet? It hasn't happened in the West yet. It hasn't happened in the majority of countries yet. Obviously, there's the Soviet Union. There's China, Cuba, Vietnam. There's these examples, but when you're talking about the U.S., for example, what is your kind of rationale on why there hasn't been kind of this revolutionary moment up until now?
Well, I think that there's two elements to that. First of all, the country has a history of immense revolutionary upheavals, and Western countries in general, certainly in Western Europe and here in the United States. I mean, the 30s were a period of insurrectionary class battles, which were of an incipiently revolutionary character. You had the sit-down strikes, mass general strikes, and then the huge wave of strikes after the Second World War. Into the 60s, 70s were a period of mass movements in the working class. In September 1981, there were 500,000 workers in Washington, D.C. for Labor Day to denounce the efforts of the Reagan administration to break the PATCO strike, which they ultimately did, with the collaboration of the trade unions. So this is a country which has seen enormous class battles. But I would say that the principal objective factor behind the failure to develop a mass socialist movement, and again, this is a complex historical question, but I would say the principal objective factor has been the strength of American capitalism. The land of unlimited opportunity, the American dream. And of course, it always had a semi-mythical character. But if you compare the living standards of significant sections of workers between the 1930s, the deaths of the Great Depression, to the 1950s, well, there was a significant growth in the living standards for a section of the working class. And that was won through bitter class battles. But workers were able to win significant gains through those struggles. The American dream, right? Every generation is better than the one that came before it. The workers, they might not go to college, but their kids could go to college. The ability to buy a house. I mean, that was, as I said, it always had a semi-mythical character, but there was an element of reality to that. That has all disappeared. I mean, that's, a distant past now. Every generation is worse than the one that preceded it. American capitalism has suffered a horrific reversal, or it's imposed a horrific reversal on the conditions of life of the working class. And I think in some sense the pandemic and the consequences of it embody that. I mean, the fact that the United States was, of all countries in the world, the least capable of responding to this in a rational way. The American ruling class was so criminal in its policies. that it's not just Trump, but Trump sort of embodies something. That's sort of expressive of the transformation of American capitalism. It's been decades since, there's been a significant growth in living standards. The life expectancy is declining. The whole country is going just backwards. And that, I think, objectively has enormous consequences for the development of a socialist movement in the United States. We actually write in a programmatic document that we produced in 2010, we said the change in objective conditions will lead American workers to change their minds. The land of unlimited opportunity is a thing of the past. And that will affect people's consciousness. And I think it's happened. The fact that more young people identify as socialists than capitalists now is expressive of this fact, even though it's excluded from the media. There's a profound change which has taken place in the nature of American capitalism, which has revolutionary consequences for the United States and for the entire world.
What do you make of kind of the new generation of American socialists? Because as I kind of go through and talk to people, I mean, you were talking about Howie Hawkins, for example, kind of being too bourgeois himself, and yet at the same time, like I meet people that are activists or just getting involved, who are identifying as socialists, who are frankly in many ways probably more liberal than say someone like Hawkins is. They're still very okay with the idea of private property. They just want to maybe nationalize some industries or some sectors of the economy. They are looking for greater worker benefits, but not necessarily an entirely new economic system. How do you kind of reconcile that? And what do you see as that? How does that affect kind of revolutionary politics moving forward in this country?
Well, I think there's sort of different layers involved in this. I mean, I think first of all, if you talk about sort of the professional so-called socialists, the people in the DSA, that is the leadership of the DSA, they're essentially Democrats, and promoted the Sanders campaign, claimed that this was going to be the vehicle for a political revolution. The DSA is nothing but a faction of the Democratic Party. And that's always how it's functioned. People like Bhaskar Sankara and, the editor of Jacobin. I mean, it's nothing really more than sort of warmed over liberalism and an effort to keep opposition within the framework of the Democratic Party. Now, on the other hand, there are, broad sections of workers and young people who, are interested in socialism, are hostile to social inequality, are moving to the left, don't necessarily have a clear idea of what socialism means or how it can be achieved. Maybe feel that somehow, and they voted for Sanders, they felt that, this would be a way of opposing social inequality. The billionaire class saw this as at least a step forward. And, they're going to go through political experiences. I think they already have, with Sanders, who, packed in his political revolution and for the second time in 4 years, declared his full support for the most reactionary representative of the Democratic Party establishment, this time Biden, in 2016 Clinton. So people go through experiences in understanding that, there really isn't a way of opposing capitalism or opposing inequality within the framework of the capitalist two-party system. And they'll move to the left or look for more radical solutions. But so I think there's a certain, you have to put a certain arrow on what one's talking about, because you have those sort of who are moving to the right, whose function is to keep social opposition behind the Democratic Party, the professional political operatives who are looking for positions, who see, the socialist label as a, calling card which they can cash in to get a position in local government or in Congress or whatever, because there's a service to be performed, or within the trade union apparatus, and they play that, they serve that role. And then you have masses of workers and young people who are moving to the left, who will go through an experience with these political tendencies, and if there's a explanation for what has happened, we'll draw more radical conclusions. There's always stages in a revolutionary process, and workers will go through stages of consciousness. I think that consciousness is a complex question, And, but I think in a certain sense, the working class as a whole is far more radical and revolutionary than the professional politicians of the Democratic Party and its sort of left flanks. I think, there's a general sentiment. And you speak to workers, you often get a response, well, what we need is a revolution. We have to throw over the whole system. They don't necessarily understand what that means, or what, the system is, capitalism, or what the alternative is, socialism. But there's a general understanding the whole system is rotten to the core and has to be overturned. So I think that is the broad-based sentiment among workers, but it has to be turned into a conscious political movement. That's what we're seeking to do. But I think those who, within the Democratic Party milieu, they play the role of blocking that and trying to keep it within the framework of the Democratic Party itself. And I would say the same goes for the Green Party.
I want to tie it back to your candidacy specifically. And let's say that you overcome some odds here and you were to get elected. What does that look like from a policy standpoint? What are things that within the framework of this governmental system that you're running to hold office in, what are things that you tangibly want to do to improve people's lives?
Well, we have a program which we advance, the social rights of the working class, the right to health care, the right to an education, the right to a job, a massive transfer of wealth from the ruling elite to the working class, massive increase of taxes on the wealthy, 90% wealth tax, the transformation of the gigantic banks and corporations into public utilities. I mean, if you look at the situation with the coronavirus, you have to have a massive organization of social public resources to address this. The expansion of healthcare infrastructure. They always say there's no money. Well, they've just handed trillions of dollars to the rich. The three richest billionaires in this country own more than the bottom half of the population, and they claim there's no money. The stock market continues to go up. There has to be a massive redistribution of resources to meet social need. And these gigantic corporations and banks, which are run on the basis of profit, have to be taken out of the control of these financial parasites and run democratically. And we will fight for such a program. I would say, though, that if I was to win the presidency, that would be the product of a massive social movement in this country. And the whole sort of political situation would be transformed. And it's not really a question of, instance, I'm going to be elected and implement these policies. The working class has to fight for them. The realization of this program requires that the working class itself take political power to run society in the United States and throughout the world, to run society on the basis of a democratic plan, on the basis of social need, to end the capitalist system, to unite with workers all over the world who face the same conditions, and establish a new type of society in which the economy is run democratically, is run on the basis of a rational plan. So if I were to win, or wherever socialists will win office, we'll fight for this program. But the working class has to take this up. And so it's not just a question of, you're going to elect someone and that's going to solve the problem. The working class has to organize itself. We call for the formation of a network of rank and file safety committees throughout the country, internationally, to preserve the interests and fight for the interests of the working class against the capitalists, the development of organized struggle in this country and throughout the world, for the working class to take political power in its own hands. That's the basis of establishing a socialist society.
As we're getting to the end of the program, I like to just kind of end these by asking everyone the same question. Now, this is a complete break from the tone of the rest of the program, but that's kind of why I like to throw it out there. If you were to kind of attempt to summarize your career, your life's work, what's the kind of central thread and the thing that you most want to convey to other people? What's the message that you really want to get out there?
I think the future is socialism, but it has to be fought for. I became politically radicalized about 20 years ago. It was around the time of the Yugoslav war under the Clinton administration. And it became clear to me, as I was becoming sort of more aware of what was happening in the world, that there's a lot of horrible things which are happening. War and repression and inequality and poverty and unemployment, assaults on democratic rights, now the growth of fascism embodied in Trump, although an international phenomenon. But what became clear to me was that you were dealing with manifestations of a deeper problem, that there was something wrong with society as a whole, capitalist society, and that the solution had to go to the root. And the root was capitalism, and that that required a movement for socialism. So I think that that's the basic perspective. I would just also say that the Socialist Equality Party, the World Socialist website, we have immense confidence in the revolutionary capacity of the working class. Workers are not going to simply sit back as this is happening and accept the horrific conditions imposed by the ruling elites. There's going to be a fight. There's going to be opposition. It's already starting. We've seen over the past year the growth of protests internationally. Now you have the pandemic, the wave of police protests against police murder, the initial emergence of working class struggle against the Back to Work campaign. This is going to intensify. We're in a period of explosive social conflict. And in our view, the critical question is to develop and arm that objective movement with a program and perspective and a leadership which is capable of achieving the logic of that struggle, which is socialism. So that's what I'm fighting for. That's what the Socialist Equality Party fights for, the World Socialist website, and our international movement is fighting for. And I would encourage those who are listening to this and you yourself to become involved and take up this fight.
All right, Joseph, thank you so much. Again, that's Joseph Kishore, Socialist Equality Party nominee for President of the United States. This is Sorry for Rambling. I'm Alex Kack, and we will see you next time.